Hey, 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 hey. I got sidetracked and lost track of time. Oh, it's great. I'm late and I got all kinds of people coming. Whew. Hey, Miss Shirley, how are you? Sorry I'm running late. I lost track of time and it's just one of them days. I was working away over there and just didn't even well, I mean, I looked at the clock, it was 12:30, and next thing I know, Nina's texting me, "Are you on yet?" And I'm like, "Oh crud." For those that aren't able to comment, sometimes you have to subscribe and sometimes you have to come out and go back in, but go back in slowly because you'll miss the actual comment box. It'll kind of disappear if you don't tag it. Hey, Pebbles. How's it going, darling? Okay. Couple more minutes and I'll get on and we'll start. And hey, Craig. And I'm going to read a little bit past 2:00 today to make up for it. So don't panic if I go over. Hope everybody's doing well. Whew. No, we're just editing away and just totally lost track of time. Hope everyone's having a good weekend. I hope there's lots of reading getting done. This looks like it's going to be a tearjerker, y'all, so get your Kleenexes out. A little bit I read is going to be crying. Trying to debate if I want to move this up close so I can read it. I mean, the first words on the book are tears blurred my vision. So, all right, everybody. I try to stay away from tearjerkers. The tearjerkers I've read lately are dark books, and I don't know there's going to be tearjerkers in them until they're there, and then they just kind of sneak up on me. This one kind of looks like a tearjerker from the beginning, so y'all get ready. Sometimes get emotional. So the name of this book is Another Life by K.L. Shandwick, and there is the sexy, beautiful cover. Is it not just? Does it not just make your ovaries go ba-da-ba-doom when you see a big muscle man covered in tats? holding a baby. This makes me just go, oh, and he looks like Chris Evans too, Captain America. You look at him in the face. Oh. Okay. Chapter 1. Tears blurred my vision as I stared motionless at the single black scuff mark on the otherwise pristine white wall in front of me. I was on my knees, my mind numb to the worrying news I had heard and what it meant for us. Distracting myself, I reflected on earlier that night, and images immediately began to float through my mind. Earlier that evening, my aching limbs felt like lead weights, but my mental strength persisted, fueled by the vibrant energy of our chanting fans. Jogging back on stage, I stood beneath the relentless, searing heat of the 50-plus spotlights. I was all but spent, my tired body running on pure adrenaline from the frenzied reaction of the crowd. A single bead of perspiration coursed its way down my face, and my heart pumped rapidly as I spotted Fletch grabbing his shiny black bass guitar. Further wet droplets flew more freely from my dark, sweat drenched hair as I nodded quickly at that at our drummer, Scuds, then leaned forward, taking my old rusty Fender from its stand. Lifting the frayed woven guitar strap over my head, I swapped up a towel from in front of the drum platform and rode vigorously at my face and hair. Throwing it behind me, I plugged the jack from my rig into my guitar and spun around, flashing my practiced rock star smile as I addressed the eager faces of our most avid followers. "What?" I goaded, addressing them by cupping the shell of my ear and pretending not to hear them. They roared in response. "You want some more?" I screamed into the mic, and of no doubt they did. Their reaction was wild. I smirked knowingly and bobbed my head, acknowledging their unified positive replies. It had been almost 2 hours since our music lovers had risen to their feet at the sound of the first note we played, yet they had waited patiently after we'd left the stage, confident that their reward of one last number for their dedication to our band. Casting my bleary eyes over the sea of jostling heads, packed into the sweltering conditions of a 16,000 capacity venue, I was reminded of how lucky I was. My racing heart clenched as I soaked in the enthralled mob's admiration. Then I struggled for a second when my throat tightened as an unexpected wave of emotion threatened to overwhelm me. Hearing the deafening roar of appreciation at the end of our tour always caught me unaware. The venue management were pissed because we'd already overrun on the set time. Plus, we had another commitment to move on to. Yeah, who were we to deny the massive adoring rock fans their one last treat? I raised my hand and my heart rate spiked as the rowdy cheers and whistles instantly died and the auditorium fell quiet. Commanding the instant silence of a mass of people always made my heart falter. The quiet magnified my awareness of the electric anticipation of the excited horde as they held their breaths and waited for the intro to that one last song. Stepping out to perform the swing song of any tour was always special, especially when we knew the demand was for the number that started it all and the song that had kick-started our cinnamon on the road to success. Encores were a common event for a famous band like us, but this time the last performance had more significance because it was the end of an era for me. Thinking about the significance of the number as I prepared to perform, I turned and stole another glance at my beautiful wife, Grace, waiting patiently in the wings. My brow creased briefly with concern when my eyes connected with hers. Grace rarely complained about anything, so I'd been watching her closely during the previous couple of weeks. The tour had taken its toll on my heavily pregnant wife, a stubborn woman who had refused to quit traveling with me to rest. Completing Cinnamon's tour in front of a lively audience made me thankful for life as a musician. The incredible opportunities it had afforded me sometimes took my breath away. Tonight was no exception, and with one last commitment before we went home, I felt relieved Grace had made it to the end of our road tour without any complications to add to her condition. We were also thankful for the added bonus of finishing the tour in our home state because there was no long trip back at the end of a punishing 3-week schedule. Playing 11 sold out venues and 4 jam packed stadiums with TV and radio station interviews in between had left us with virtually no downtime to recover. Cranking up my charisma, I connected with the rowdy concert goers by pouring feeling into the song, whipping up their enthusiasm, and having them join in and belt out the chorus by pointing the microphone at them. Their response produced an ear-splitting rendition covering every single word on point, like they were the rock stars themselves. When the song came to an end, we didn't drag out the curtain call. Instead, the band gathered in a huddle at the front of the stage and bowed in unison. I looked again to my gorgeous, attentive wife with a mixture of relief and excitement that we made it through to this last gig. Wiping my face again, I threw my dampened towel out into the crowd, and a cacophony of sounds swelled from the back of the auditorium, the deafening noise reaching me all the way at the front. I glanced down toward a young bottle blonde who had caught the discarded towel, and she held it up to her face. Women and men hit on me all the time, and I never understood why someone would go nuts for my sweaty t-shirts and discarded towels. The last thing on earth I'd want to own was a sweat-stained piece of material from anyone who wasn't my wife. Being groped by groupies and fans of all flavors annoyed me to no end. I was a married man, and where I used to suck it up and laugh it off when I was single, now all I wanted was Grace. She was my soulmate, my perfect match. And as everyone who knew us said, she was the better half of me. In fact, when I'd met her, Grace had knocked me off my feet and taken my breath away. And before I knew it, she quickly became my world. It hardly felt possible that 2 years had gone by since we'd married, because every day felt like a vacation with her around. This is what made tonight's concert even more special. Grace and I were stoked at the prospect of becoming doting parents, and in preparation of the baby's arrival, I'd taken a year's paternity leave from the band. Smiling widely, Grace looked radiant and happy as I walked across the stage. Sometimes when I looked at her, I almost busted a nut in my jeans. She was so hot. Even after all this time, she was still the most beautiful woman I'd ever encountered. She looked striking with her long, wild, dark hair, cute as fuck button nose, and massive almond-shaped eyes. And since she was pregnant, her huge, round belly. My heart flipped as she walked over toward me, with those ruby red lips framing her gorgeous mouth, and I saw how the light caught the twinkle in her huge, shining gray eyes. In that precise moment, I had never felt more in love with Grace. "You okay, baby? Should we go home to bed?" "Don't be silly, Cole. I'm fine, honey. Besides, the launch is on the way. Finish this one last obligation," she said, shaking her head. "The venue isn't far. 10 blocks are over, I think, and we only need to stay an hour or so, right?" she asked, glancing at her watch. 2.5 hour sets, you said? 2 half-hour sets, you said? Grace continued to use her persuasive ways and eventually convinced me to attend the launch party for a new band recently signed to our label. I knew if I had pressed any further, my wife would only have dug her heels in harder. Figuring it was better to get my appearance over with than cause her more stress by arguing, I decided to make good on the promise I'd made to attend. Scanning the dimly lit, grungy-looking space, relief washed over me when I caught sight of my wife still sitting in the booth where I'd left her. She was rocking a fabulous figure-hugging dress she'd squeezed herself into despite her bump. Its brilliant white color immediately set her apart from everyone else in the room. With or without the dress, Grace would have stood out anyway. Men never looked twice at my wife. It only took them one glance, and they became transfixed by the way she was put together. Usually she would have been on my arm, but in her condition, I was concerned about how the events of the day had affected her. Also, with the heavy vibrations from the drum and bass players in the band, I had parked her ass as far away from the stage as I could. I had seated Grace in the large sectional booth on the far side of the dance floor where I knew she'd be safe from the crowd, and when I glanced over and saw her still there, I excused myself from my three bandmates and cut straight across the dance floor toward her. The break in the music set was welcome, and I felt all tension leave my body when the heavy metal band took a 15-minute interlude. The new signings, Stone Gorge, weren't the best musicians I'd heard, but decent enough for us to wait it out for the first half of their gig. As this was an exclusive launch party, the press was in attendance, and the label had wanted our band to show some support for them. In general terms, I didn't mind obliging because giving back was important. But on this occasion, my wife's well-being took priority. After the long day we'd had, I wanted to take her home. As I neared Grace, she glanced up and smiled, tugged at her lips when her gorgeous eyes connected with mine. A smile also spread on my lips and widened affectionately as I approached. My eyes narrowed suspiciously when I saw she was talking to a known skinny blonde groupie called Becky. I'd seen her around with scuds from time to time, and fortunately, she wasn't someone I'd dipped my wick in before. Becky was so busy running off at the mouth, she had noticed I was behind her. My jaw ticked in frustration when I caught some of the comments she made and heard what the conversation was about. Oh my God, if I had a guy with a fine ass like his in my bed, I'd never leave it, she confessed. Having no idea who she was talking about, I decided to cut in on the gossip. Oh yeah? Who's the lucky guy? My voice was laced with sarcasm as I eyed Grace and bit back a grin. Glancing over her shoulder, Becky caught sight of me and gasped for breath, swallowing roughly and cringed. Moving my position to see both her and Grace better, my eyes darted to Becky. When she averted her gaze, I noted how uneasy she was. Turning my attention back to my wife, I saw her wince. It was at this point the penny dropped. This wasn't idle female chit-chat between two women. Becky was studying an opinion, and from her reaction when I confronted her, I knew instinctively she had been talking about me. Unperturbed by Becky's comment, Grace chuckled and shook her head. Your timing is awful, she admonished, glancing up at me, but the twinkle in her eyes told me she was flattered by the groupie's envious remark. Becky's crimson face and zero eye contact, on the other hand, was a rare reaction from someone normally so brazen. Ah, I wasn't supposed to hear that, was I? I asked, letting the lecherous groupie know I knew her comment was directed toward Grace about me. But now that I have, I couldn't agree with you more, I replied, sliding my hand around my wife's shoulder. Crouching down beside her, I pressed my lips gently to hers, in no hurry to pull them away, but I did. Great advice. Grace, you shouldn't listen to Becky, I affirmed playfully, making a joke from Becky's comment. Relief washed through the groupie's worried eyes as she rolled them like she was more pissed with herself than me. It served her right. She shouldn't have been drooling like that about another woman's husband. You're incorrigible, Grace scolded me aloud, but I heard the hint of humor in her tone and knew she was enjoying both Becky's discomfort and my unwillingness to let the subject slide. Standing straight, I glared down at as Becky continued to look away. It struck me then that Becky was losing her looks, but that didn't surprise me with the rock and roll lifestyle she led. The girl had been burning the candle at both ends, and it showed. If you'll excuse me, I came to ask my beautiful wife to dance, I explained, and held my hand out theatrically for Grace. Slipping hers into mine, I helped her to her feet and led her onto the dance floor. That was naughty, Cole, Grace chuckled. And why are we on the dance floor when there's no music? She asked. Who needs music when I have an angel in my arms? Are those harps I hear? Grace looked at the ceiling, dismissing my corny line. Pulling her snug little body close to mine with our hands held close to my heart, I pressed my cheek to hers. I can't dance without music, she insisted through a giggle. Unperturbed, I thought for a moment. You look like Hellstrom, right? Here's to us. You like Hellstorm, right? Here's to us. She nodded but looked confused. Then she shook her head in silent protest. There you go. We'll dance to that. But shook her head in silence. There you go. We'll dance to that. Forget these dead beats. We'll have our own silent disco. How does that sound? You are way too corny and romantic to be a rock star, she stated with a look that told me she adored me. Yep, but don't tell them that. I whispered conspiratorially and winked. Actually, it's because I'm a rock star that I can choose to dance with my girl in a room full of people without music, and none of them will bat an eye. The smile Grace gave me was almost contemptuous, as if she didn't believe me. Narrowing her eyes, she glanced around the room, scrutinizing everyone in turn. And when she was done, I felt her body relax when she realized my assumption was probably right. Giving them the once over myself, I saw most of them were stoned, and I knew unless someone was taking off their clothes, making an ass of themselves but naked, or competing in a wet t shirt competition, no one cared. We danced slowly to the song in our heads, mentally singing it, and a couple of times I'd forget and sing out a line. Want to get a room? I whispered in Grace's ear after a couple of minutes. It was only a little after midnight, and even though I had asked, we continued to shuffle around to the song in our heads. At first, Grace didn't reply and was determined to see the gig through, but I knew with only 5 weeks to go until her due date, she was having trouble sleeping. She needed her rest because she'd been struggling with growing pains and indigestion. When she wasn't disturbed with those, her sleep was disrupted by her frequent trips during the night to pee. Does this does this mean I'm on a promise? She asked, lowering her eyes and pretending to act coy. Always, baby, I replied, stroking her back. Then I cupped my hand at the base of her skull and pulled her head closer. I pressed an affectionate kiss to her forehead and pulled back to look at her. Hey, Teddy. We both chuckled as I slipped my hand into Grace's and led her over to the guys in my band to say our goodnights. Damn, Cole, Scuds protested when I leaned in for a hug. Next, you'll be telling us you can only come on tour if Grace can come too. Oh, wait, you did that already, he teased, asking, shaking his head. Yeah, don't forget, I've seen how many attempts you've had over the years to trying to find a girl like Grace. Wait, wait until it's your turn, and we'll see how great you are at controlling these feelings if you find her. Pussy whipped, Moz declared through a cough, and Fletch grinned widely. I sighed and gave him an is that the best you got look. Aw, come on, look at her. This little dude's ready to drop. Give the guy a break, Fletch offered as he came to my rescue by nodding at Grace's belly. See, he's the only one among you with any sense of occasion, I agreed. I was happy to own how my behavior had changed. When I met Grace, she was the one girl I never saw coming and the only one I never wanted to get away from. Our relationship was built on trust, and Grace made me want to be the real man and not the front man from a band living up to the expectations of the public. People could think as they liked and judge me how they wanted to, but I was damned if I'd let them dictate when I could put her first. Hugging the guys one by one, each of them wished Grace well, and we headed for the door just as Stone Gorge took their place behind their instruments on the small stage again. As we were driven home in the back of the black sedan, Grace snuggled in beside me, her head on my shoulder, and she sighed contentedly. How did I live without you? I've got no idea, baby. It must have been miserable for you, I replied, trying to keep a serious tone to my voice. Turning her face up to look at me, she laughed. You're an ass, you know that? Oh, you mean I'm a fine ass, I corrected, reiterating Becky's description of me, and Grace burst out laughing. That poor girl's face, she muttered, reflecting on the incident, and it was my turn to laugh. She's lucky you're secure. If a guy made a remark like that to me about you, I'd knock him the fuck out. Any man fantasizing about being in bed with you that isn't me doesn't deserve to live, I stated. Oh, I adore the caveman that threatens to break free in you at times. Yeah? I asked, pretending I took her seriously. Hell yeah, it's hot, she agreed. How hot? She chuckled, chuckling as she processed my question. And I took a moment just to look at her. Pregnancy made Grace radiantly beautiful, and the way the moonlight caught her features enthralled me. My eyes settled on her soft, plump lips, and I fought the urge to kiss her as I waited for her reply. On a scale of 1 to 5, maybe a 4, inhaling deeply, I sighed, pretending I felt let down. Oh, wait a minute. I was just reading them. On a scale of 1 to 5, maybe a 4. Inhaling deeply, I sighed, pretending I felt let down. Only a 4, huh? And what would it take to get a 5? I wondered aloud. Sing to me. You have no idea what your voice does to me, Cole Harkin. Goosebumps doesn't even begin to explain what that rich tone of yours does to me. All I know is I want to rip off your clothes. Immediately, I began singing the old Joe Cocker hit, You Can Leave Your Hat On, causing her to crack up laughing before she lurched forward, holding her belly. Laughter gave way to concern as I furrowed my brow and looked her over. Jesus, are you okay? Yeah, she replied, rubbing her lower belly as she straightened her spine in the sooner this little cherub is on the outside now, the better, she muttered. We sat quietly in the car after this, me holding her close and rubbing her arm. Fortunately, by the time we made it through the gates to our home, the pain she'd felt had subsided. Good gosh, please don't look at me. I'm a mess, she muttered, dumping her designer purse on the floor when she caught sight of herself in our entrance hall mirror. Nonsense, baby. I'm still very attracted to you. Never been more so than right now. Check you out. Hair like this, I commented, grabbing a handful of her wild, dark, silky mane and sifting my fingers through it. Kissing her cheek, I added, and when I see this gorgeous face with your sexy as fuck full lips and this amazing belly, I stopped talking when my emotions overwhelmed me and I had to kiss her instead. Passion tore through me as soon as her tongue slid over mine, and my heart rate kicked up its pace. As fire began to flow through my veins, my grip tightened further as my dick strained to get hard in my jeans. A soft erotic moan traveled between Grace's mouth and mine, and with my arms at full stretch, giving her bump, I grabbed 2 handfuls of her ass. Dear God in heaven, will you two get a room? Maddie, our housekeeper, had wandered into the hallway and beat a hasty retreat to the kitchen. Jesus, Maddie, will you get yourself a pair of noisy clogs and stop creeping the fuck up on us? Besides, it's the middle of the night. You should be in bed. I called back. Grace burst out laughing and swatted my arm. Stop it. You'll make her uncomfortable and she'll leave. You think? The woman lives to give me shit. Where else would she get away with talking to her boss the way she talks to me? Well, she's right. We should go up to our bedroom, Grace suggested, but suddenly doubled over in pain again. Are you okay? I asked as I bent over with her and held her tight. Jeez, she replied, unable to answer as she rubbed her belly and breathed her way through the pain. I'm not breathing like that because I'll pass out from hyperventilating. When her discomfort subsided, she took another deep breath and straightened up. Wow, that was intense. Should we go to the hospital? I asked, my arms tightening protectively in support. Because I've had a twinge, you want them to laugh at us? She replied in a matter-of-fact tone. From my perspective, she had more than a few twinges in the previous few days. I don't want you to be in pain. Then you shouldn't have gotten me pregnant. She smirked and stepped away from me, but barely made it the sixth step before she doubled over again. Turning to look at me, she shrugged. Maybe a trip to the hospital isn't such a bad idea. What are y'all thinking so far? I take it Miss Shirley is the author. I wasn't sure, but I kind of thought it might be. Chapter 2. Grabbing the keys from the bowl in the hallway where Stewart, one of my house staff, had left them, I turned Grace back in the direction of the front door. She had already packed bags in preparation for the hospital and stuffed them in the trunk of all three cars we made use of. After helping her into the car passenger seat, I slid behind the wheel and my chest felt tight. As I drove out through the heavy privacy gates of our home, it dawned on me that Stewart should have driven. But I wasn't thinking straight, and it hadn't occurred to me to call him out of his room. It was fortunate I had only been drinking water all night out of concern for my wife. Grace messaged her obstetrician, dropped her cell into her oversized purse, and placed it on the floor as another contraction ripped through her. When her discomfort finally subsided, it gave me a short window of calm to talk to her. 35 weeks is still good, right? Slamming my foot on the gas, I turned my nervous gaze from the rain-slashed windshield to eye her with concern. The windshield wipers beat in a rhythm which sounded faster and louder than usual as I waited for her to respond. I was naturally concerned because she missed her previous 2 doctor's appointments due to us being on the road. But when I challenged her about this, Grace had insisted she and the baby would be fine. Until week 33, Grace's pregnancy had been a textbook one. Apart from the discomfort of needing to pee all the time and some niggling pains, she assured me was to be expected as the birth date grew nearer. Pain clouded my gorgeous wife's normally vibrant gray eyes. When she looked back at me, her appearance did nothing to reassure me. Clutching her swollen belly, the agony was clear in her face as she nursed her bump with her hands. Yeah, another 3 weeks and they'd class her as full term, so I guess our baby should be. Another painful contraction caught her already labored breathing and interrupted the reassurance I had desperately sought. My chest tightened further and my anxiety increasing because apart from the actual birth, seeing Grace doubled up in pain was the part I'd been dreading the most from her condition. Gripping the steering wheel, I noted my sweaty palms clung desperately to it as anxiety threatened to take over when I heard how deeply she inhaled in her effort to manage her pain. I was impressed by my wife's conscious effort to remain in control of her labor. As time passed, she began to moan louder in discomfort, and my heart jolted with anxiety each time I heard it. Nausea came in a wave, and I swallowed it down because it wasn't time, and no matter how much we talked about the birth, I wasn't prepared. Watching the love of my wife in pain was hell, even if it was necessary to bring the new life we had created together into this world. When another contraction wore off and additional concerns sprung to mind, your obstetrician's office replied to your message, right? Grace reached down, dragged her huge purse full of shit onto her lap, and rummaged around inside. Finally, she pulled out her cell phone and let the heavy bag slide back to the floor. The bright blue screen instantly glowed, lighting up the surrounding blanket of darkness inside the car. Swiping the small screen, she lifted her cell to her ear, and I knew she had received a voicemail. Yeah, she barely managed to breathe before another pain took her attention. Relief washed over me, glad that someone with the expertise to help Grace would be waiting for her on arrival. I glanced at the digital clock on the dashboard panel, 3:21 a.m. Beside it was the date, January 7th, and I noted that until now it wasn't one which held any significance for me. A swell of excitement from inside reminded me it would be the day to surpass all the days of my life. The day my first child would be born and the beginning of a new life for Grace and me. It took 7 more contractions, 3 minutes apart, before we arrived at the Memorial Hospital entrance. Abandoning our imposing black SUV in the no parking zone, I ran around the hood and yanked open the door so forcefully the vehicle rocked on its axle. Gripping Grace by the arms, I spoke in a gentle, encouraging tone. That's it, baby. You're doing great. We're here. It won't be long before the doc can assess you and give you some drugs for the pain. No giving away our bedroom secrets when he does, by the way. I joked, trying to ease the tension that had returned to the situation as we made our way into the hospital. Grace scoffed at my comment as we entered the foyer, and another painful wave stopped her dead in her tracks. She clung to the long metal door handle to steady herself while a kind middle-aged hospital orderly appeared from nowhere with a wheelchair. I helped him ease my wife into it as her pain subsided again. Looks like we got ourselves an expensive new addition to the family on the way, he teased, and I grinned in relief at his attempt to take the sting out of Grace's discomfort. Hey, you're that Cole. Yeah, but I'm not the major attraction here, right? I warned, and he glanced down at my wife and nodded. As the contraction waned, Grace glanced up at the orderly and cussed under her breath. This kid can have anything she wants, no questions asked. She just needs to be here already. Another groan tore from her throat, and she doubled over again, cradling her belly, and I prayed for a quick end to this experience for her. We rode the elevator to the 5th floor, where an obstetric nurse was waiting, clipboard in hand. Her beady eyes widened in surprise when she recognized who I was. I scowled and shot her a warning look not to acknowledge me. The last thing my wife needed was a fangirl fawning over me while she was in pain. Dr. Ken is waiting for you, Grace. If you'll follow me, I'll get you settled and let him know you've arrived. There are a few papers to sign, Cole, but we can figure those out once we get Grace settled. Insurance, I figured dismissing it. Nothing was as important as Grace's comfort. Minutes passed after we entered the room, and the obstetric nurse squirted monitoring gel and attached monitoring pads to Grace's bump. A wave of emotion swelled in my throat at the sound of our daughter's steady heartbeat as it echoed loudly through the room. It was no secret we were having a girl. Grace had told everyone. I noted the equipment had begun to record a series of squiggly lines onto the folded paper attached to a tray underneath. The nurse then focused on checking Grace's vitals before she turned to us and smiled. Grace, your blood pressure is perfect right now. This, she stated, pointing at the 2 traces being recorded. Top trace is your baby's heart rate, and you can see it fluctuate here. This means she's awake and active right now. The graph at the bottom is showing us your contractions are every 3 minutes, which is regular and exactly what we like to see. That's the baby's heartbeat? I asked, pointing out the inked recording of it. Yes, she smiled. Your baby's heart rate is increasing with each contraction at present, which is perfectly normal. I smiled in awe of this. Discussing the birthing plan with Grace, the nurse informed us Grace would have a shot of steroids to help mature the baby's lungs for the birth. As she was finishing talking, Dr. Ken strode into the room looking like he'd come straight from a movie set with his expensive stethoscope around his neck and a pristine white lab coat covering his designer clothing. He had glossy blonde hair, unblemished skin, and perfect, even white teeth. Way too attractive for a guy touching my wife. Although I respected his profession, I hated that he was such a good looking dude because he had Grace's permission to explore the most intimate parts of her body. Keeping my jealousy in check, I reminded myself he had clinical reasons for doing this. Discussing the history of the previous few hours, it became clear Grace was unsure as to whether the sac of fluid around her baby had broken, emitting to small, frequent trickles of liquid with each contraction. After examining her abdomen, Dr. King confirmed the baby's head was low in Grace's pelvis and informed us he needed to take a swab from inside her entrance to make sure our baby hadn't been exposed to any infection. My jaw ticked with tension at the thought of this. Preparing an examination pack on a small mobile cart, the nurse rolled it close to the bed as the doctor washed his hands. After drying them, he snapped on some gloves and sat down on a stool at the edge of the bed, positioning Grace lower in preparation for the procedure. After ensuring her hygiene, he explained, I'm using a speculum, and once I take a germ culture, I'll also take a small swab test to check for the presence of amniotic fluid. This is important as your baby is a little premature and early rupture can predispose the increased risk of infection. Watching intently from the side of the bed, my beady, concerned eyes flicked from what he was doing at the business end to Grace's face, and I noted her pain-filled eyes stare up into mine for reassurance. You're doing great, baby. Grace's body sagged, and she sighed with my encouragement, and my gaze returned to focus on the young doctor's face. A frown creased his brow, and his eyes narrowed, widened, then shot in my direction. When he held my gaze a second too long, I sensed something was wrong. Nurse, can you position the light closer, please? He instructed, focusing back on the point of entrance between Grace's legs again. Hovering in the background, the nurse jumped, startled with the sharpness in his tone. Stepping forward, she repositioned the spotlight, and as her eyes fell between Grace's leg, a look of worry flitted through them. A short gasp hitched in her breath, and Dr. Ken's eyes darted to hers. What is it? I asked, sensing immediately something was wrong. I'm collecting some samples to send to the lab for culture. Once I've done this, I'll answer any questions you have. The doctor said, shutting me down. Hearing our baby's heart rate spike instantly in protest to his ministrations distracted me from him. But when I looked back at the dog, he was handing the slides to the nurse. Standing quickly, he tidied everything back on the tray, flicked off the rubber gloves, and discarded them into a stainless steel pedal bin. With his back to us, he washed his hands before he turned and addressed us. Give me a few minutes to fill out the pathology and microbiology forms, and I'll come back to talk to you. Grace looked completely unfazed by the examination and continued breathing through the contractions once he had left the room. When she hadn't asked questions, I convinced myself it was my ignorance that had made me think there was something wrong. But my fears rose again when the doctor was still absent some 15 minutes later. Between contractions, as we waited, there were pockets of normality where Grace and I discussed some practical plans for after our daughter was born. But as time went by, I became increasingly frustrated and a nagging doubt grew at the back of my mind the longer he took to return. Watching Grace continue to suffer made my chest taut, heightening my awareness of every breath I took. I'd never suffered from anxiety, but I recognized this was probably what was going on. Given how useless I felt, I was used to controlling situations not being controlled. Reflecting on everything I'd witnessed since arriving at the hospital, the only positives were the baby's steady heartbeat, and with each contraction, although agony for Grace, it meant we were one step closer to the birth of our precious baby. When the door to our room slowly cracked open, the doctor stepped inside. The reluctant way he dragged his feet toward the bed almost freaked me out. I sensed hesitancy and dread in his presence. Gone was the chirpy, suave, and extremely self assured authoritarian, and in his place was a young, dejected looking character who was almost unrecognizable as the same man. I felt an aura of humility instead of how the doctor usually commanded respect. And there's something else about his mood I couldn't define in that moment. As he lowered himself gently onto the bed, the door opened again, and the nurse who'd been attending to Grace re entered the room. I felt her reluctance to be present, and her gaze fell to the floor. Sitting silently, we waited for Grace's contraction to ebb. My heartbeat pounded in fear while I watched Dr. Ken draw several deep breaths. A couple of times he swallowed roughly and closed his eyes as if what he needed to say was somehow painful for him and highly significant for us. Frustration and anguish clashed in my gut, knotting it tight, and I dug deep to find patience I never knew I possessed until that moment. Either that or it was the unparalleled level of fear for our future, which, until then, had prevented me from speaking out. What is it? I eventually asked when when the weight finally overwhelmed me. Staring worriedly at me, it felt like an age before the young doctor found his courage, blinked, and took a deep breath. From the anticipation in those seconds, I knew he had no comforting words in what he needed to tell us. Scanning the room for everything tangible to our situation, all I could see were the monitors that showed how Grace and the baby were coping from what the nurse had explained before nothing had changed. When yet another contraction tailed off, Grace smiled reassuringly to me, then again toward the doctor and the nurse. Suddenly, I noticed how young the nurse appeared and how upset she looked. My heart almost tore from my chest with a wave of fear and anticipation, and I instinctively knew whatever they had to say was going to change us. While I silently prayed for everything to be okay, the door unexpectedly opened again and a small, balding man stepped inside. Initially, I thought he may have been the pediatrician, dressed in his green scrubs. I have no idea why, perhaps because my mind wasn't willing to acknowledge the unspoken truth that there was something wrong. Standing next to the nurse, the new member of the medical team also avoided my gaze. I was about to ask who he was when Dr. Ken cleared his throat and caught my attention again. Grace, he said to gain her focus. Looking nervously to me, he said her name again. Grace Cole. He paused and swallowed audibly. His hesitancy made my heart beat erratically. Inside my head, I screamed for him to spit it out, whatever was wrong, as my heart tried to ignore the signs of concern I had seen in his eyes. Blood whooshed rapidly through my ears, and I wished it could have been loud enough to drown out any potentially bad news. I was already in shock, and I had yet to learn why. Grace's pain filled eyes went wide with alarm at his assertive tone, her gaze switching from me to the doctor, then back to me. My hand automatically sought hers, and I gripped it tight. All right, y'all, I can feel it building. Get ready. When I examined you, Grace, I saw something of concern. There are some changes in your cervix, and I've sent some slides to the laboratory, and now we wait for the expert's opinion. What is it? What's wrong? Does she need antibiotics? Surgery? Gosh, is the baby infected or something? My rapid questions came without filter or any thought for how Grace was feeling. The look of concern on the doctor's face ramped up my distress. At this point, I wouldn't be willing to hazard a guess. He stopped talking and stared blankly at Grace, who was interrupted by another contraction. At first, I thought she hadn't heard him because she continued to breathe through her pain as she had with all the others. Then I realized the doctor was waiting for her to finish. What the hell could be wrong? She's been fine apart from these twinges. Fighting my impulse to question him further, I waited for Grace to focus because we both needed to be informed. When the contraction subsided, my wife stared fearfully at her doctor. Grace, because you're in an established labor, our priority is to help you deliver your baby. This means we need to take you to the operating room straight away. Your progress appears okay at present, but a vaginal birth is not an option. Your baby will become distressed if we leave it much longer. What? What? My sharp, loud response startled the doctor as I tried to absorb the worrying situation we suddenly faced. Anguish dragged me to my feet. What do you think it is? Why can't she have a vaginal delivery? Ignoring me, the doctor focused his attention on Grace. What's wrong with her cervix? Grace had an examination at the start of her pregnancy, right, baby? I persisted, turning to look to her for assurance. Grace's eyes grew wide, but she frowned and went into the throes of another contraction before she could say anything. The contraction had changed and appeared to be almost continuous. Her test came back normal, I added, looking back to the doctor, but he didn't reply. Panic set in, and my heart began throwing out crazy rhythmic, rhythmic beats in distress as my breathing became shallow and faster. This can't be happening. Did you hear me? I probed again. The helpless look the doctor gave me crushed. You're right. Grace was screened, and the results were normal at that time, he confirmed quietly. But I'm asking you to trust me. Grace can't deliver normally. No, no, no. A tight band of pressure squeezed my brain until I thought I'd have a stroke. All my reasoning fought for me to not accept what he'd stated. As a result, the pressure and tension made me feel as if my skull was going to explode. Is this why she's been in so much pain lately? I inquired, eyeing him carefully. It's entirely possible the cell changes were still at undetectable levels when Grace was screened, but yes, undoubtedly it would have caused her pain. Cell changes. The anguish in my voice was apparent. I'm so sorry we don't have time for further explanations until after we operate. Our priority is to make Grace comfortable right now and ensure your baby is born safely. The only way to do this is with emergency surgery. I could have continued to force the issue because Grace and I needed an explanation, but in terms of prioritizing the immediate situation, the doctor was right. Grace had to be helped to bring our baby into the world, and everything else had to wait. I figured once the baby was born, we'd be in a better position to investigate where to get help to make Grace well again. Stay strong, baby. We'll get through this. Trust me, we're going to find out what's going on with you and get the best guys in the business to fix it. As I rambled on, spouting meaningless words in my efforts to make Grace feel safe, she focused her energy on her labor pains and the safe delivery of her daughter. Not once, when Dr. King gave us this news until she was ready for the operating room, did Grace break down, show distress, or ask any questions. Let's get on with what needs to be done, Grace stated to Dr. Ken in an expressionless tone. She sounded as if she had detached herself from everyone else in the room. The moment Grace gave her consent to the surgical procedure, the nurse and the other guy in the scrubs, whom I learned was the anesthesiologist, moved in and prepared my courageously calm girl for the operating room. As the birth was an emergency procedure, and the baby's still premature, Grace was given the steroid shot for our daughter's lungs, and with no time for anything other than a full general anesthetic, I wasn't allowed to stay with her for the birth of our baby. As they wheeled her through the operating room doors, I held Grace's hand, bent down, and kissed her. Smoothing her hair, I forced a soft smile as my worried eyes met hers, and my heartbeat battered erratically in denial. Stay strong, beautiful. I'll be right here waiting for you when you wake up. I love you so much. Forget everything else and concentrate on you and our baby. Don't worry, we'll work out the rest. Too choked to say anything else, I stood up, straightened, and watched them wheel her inside the room, and I tried not to cry. Bawling was the last thing I wanted to do when Grace was being so brave. Pain seared through my body as I watched my world lying helplessly on that gurney. Holding my breath, I waited until the sound of the heavy operating door clicked shut and I fell to my knees on the floor. I was still in the same position when my tears had dried, and I continued to stare at the single dark mark on the wall, my mind back in the present. I still struggled to make sense of the grim expression on the doctor's face and how he avoided expanding on what was wrong with my wife. We came to the hospital to have a baby, to be a family. Being left in a corridor with more questions than answers wasn't how this was supposed to go. Why would the doctor refuse to comment on what he suspected, yet act with such certainty regarding the surgery for Grace? How could emergency surgery pose less of a risk to her and our baby? Every minute I waited for news felt excruciatingly long. As I sat there undisturbed, I willed someone to come out and find me, to tell me Grace and our baby were perfectly fine, and to say that the doctor was wrong. What y'all think? I'm gonna cry. I'm gonna cry. So that was chapters 1 and 2. So guys, let me know what you think here. Hey May, nice to meet you. Ah, May's the author. Okay. I missed you up there somewhere then, didn't I? Or did I? I just saw them talking to Miss Shirley and assumed she was the author. I apologize. Thank you for letting me read it. I appreciate it. It was so good. Oh, yes, Miss Shirley. I am leaving you hanging, sister. Because Miss May needs to sell some books. Mama's got bills to pay. Well, thank you, Miss May. I appreciate that. That book's gonna make me cry. I have a hard time with books like that. I'm not gonna lie. I usually steer away from books like that because I can't handle that stuff. I'm better in the real life world than I am with books when it comes to that stuff. Thank you, Pebbles. I appreciate it. Thank you, Teddy. All right, y'all. I'm so sorry I was late. I was just in my own little world at my desk over there, just working away and just didn't even pay attention to time. I apologize. I'm going to have to set me an alarm. Actually, Nina needs to put my Sundays on my calendar so that they'll just alert me in time. So, all right, everybody, go get it. It's on Amazon for $3.99, I think is what I saw. And let Miss KL Shandwick is her pen name. Let her know what you think about it. Leave a review. And next reading is Wednesday night. And what shall I read Wednesday night? Then forgot. Are you kidding me? All right, there we go. All righty. Oh, doggies, that's small. Wednesday night, we have The Hot King and I by Miss Sana Wrights. I guess that's it. And then Thursday night, I have Numa, the Celestial Beings Trilogy, I think is how it is. And it's by Eli Litz. So it's kind of a sci-fi one. But The Hot King and I, which means a hot flash kit, ladies. Bring them on. You're going to need them. You know it. Yes, you have to wait 3 days, Miss Shirley. Sorry. Mama got to pay bills here too, so you know. All righty, y'all go enjoy the day with family. If you can't get with family and friends and stuff because of the stupid virus, then go enjoy a book. Go sit down and just read. Turn everything off. Maybe some music in the background, but turn the TV off. Don't go sit in front of the boob tube again, and just chillax. The Apothecary series is pretty awesome, ain't it, Miss Shirley? Um, how that and it's long. Man, I thought it just went on forever. Alrighty, so everybody have a good day, good weekend, and let's try to have a good Monday too. I will holler at you guys later. Happy reading.